Hey guys, and welcome back to the Fantasy Table brought to you by the Blues Stable. My name is Luke Verkamp, and tonight I will be the only host tonight. Austin and myself, we are on a call, and not even 1 minute into us being on the call together and talking, Austin's internet crashed, so he cannot make it tonight, unfortunately, because his internet is still not back on. It's been at least a half hour, maybe closer to an hour by now whenever I'm recording this. But yeah, so it's just going to be me tonight. So I'm just going to go quick run through with everything since there won't be able to be much discussion on anything. Tonight, we have the news and notes as always, waiver pickups, a new segment that is called Trending or Ending. I'm going to talk about some trends that have happened with some players and if I can see that trend continuing or if it'll end. And our starts of the week. Austin did give me his starts of the week. I do not have his reasoning, unfortunately, so I can't tell you that. But if you want to know his reasoning on it, go ahead and follow him on Twitter at the Austin Isaac. And go ahead and follow our other Twitters, which is our main Twitter at the Fantasy Table and my personal at Big Verkamp, which they should be. Oh, wrong side. They'll be on the left side of your screen, so go ahead and follow us. But starting off, we'll get going with the news and notes from around the whole NFL. And the biggest one from this past week, it actually broke while me and Austin were recording last week, is the Dalvin Cook news. Now, Dalvin Cook, first, Adam Schefter broke that he was a victim, and then shortly after, it was alleged that he was the one that was involved with the domestic violence and he was the one that was causing it. So we don't know what's going to happen there. There's a lot of legal stuff that has to go through that. But from what we saw, he played this past week. From what we know, he'll probably play until more information is out. So there's not much you can do. If you want, you can pick up Alexander Madison just in case. I personally don't think anything's going to happen anytime soon, but you never know. There's always a chance that something could happen out of the blue because that's how stuff happens, like we saw with Henry Ruggs a couple weeks ago. Cam Newton is back home in Carolina, and he played his first game with them, and he was a spark for that Carolina Panthers offense. He got a rushing touchdown on his first play. He came back in later in the game and threw a touchdown as well. So he's going to get a majority of the first team reps this week. Matt Rule already said, so I think he'll be starting this week. And he's got a really good matchup against Washington as well. I know I'll talk about him a little bit later, so I'll get to him more. But moving on, we got Odell Beckham Jr. to the Rams. Now, when this news first broke, I didn't see this doing much to that Rams offense. It's obviously a boost for Odell. And to me, everyone is complaining about, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods' value is going to go down. And to me, it was Cooper Kupp. He's staying where he's at. I mean, he was averaging – he's putting up historic numbers. So he should be fine with where he's at. And then I thought Robert Woods could have slightly got dinged, but then it was later revealed that Robert Woods tore his ACL that same day that Odell got signed. So now it's going to be Cooper Kupp, Odell, and Van Jefferson on the three receiver sets. And I know I might be in the minority for this, but I'm actually more excited about Van Jefferson than I am for Odell. In their first game together, Odell only got like 3 targets and Van Jefferson had like 5. But Odell's just getting used to this offense. He was only practicing for like 2 days. So I wouldn't take that as any sort of benchmark. He kind of had to be forced in there with the Robert Woods injury. So I wouldn't gauge how Odell's going to do based on that. They got their bye this week, so Odell's going to get a lot more involved with the playbook, a lot more involved in practice. And their next game, I think he'll be able to have a better showing. I do think it's a boost for him. I think he can still be a good fantasy receiver. I don't think he's going to be a top 5 guy like he was in the past, but I still think he could be a guy that you could end up playing in your flex every week. So we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, it was big signing of the week. Ben Roethlisberger got put on the COVID list. He did not play this past week, and the Steelers are already announcing that they're practicing as if it's going to be Mason Rudolph starting for them this next week against the Chargers. So I'd keep an eye on this. If Ben sits again, really the only person I would want to start in the Steelers offense is Najee. He's the only guy that I would trust. But I can understand if you need to play Deontay or even Pat Freiermuth. I really don't know any other real receivers in that offense that would warrant starting if Ben is sitting. Kyler and DeAndre were again out in week 10, and their status is up in the air for week 11. And then they also have a bye in week 12. So I could see them just being precautious. They're going to just sit out Kyler and DeAndre this next game as well, which the Rams losing to the 49ers have a big part in that as well. If the Rams won, I think that the Cardinals would have been a little more antsy and pushed Kyler and DeAndre out there this next week if they had to, just so that way they could try to win. But Kyler, he got hurt last year towards the end of the season, and that really hurt the Cardinals. So I could see this being a thing where they want to be precautious and hold him back, especially since they have a bye in week 12, to wait till he's fully healthy for that playoff run. Because if Kyler goes down towards the end of the season, that just basically ruins their Super Bowl chances whenever they have a really good team. Aaron Jones sprained his MCL. He's going to be out a week or two, which this is actually really good news for Aaron Jones. A lot of people, whenever the injury first happened, they thought it could have been a torn ACL. So the fact that it's just a sprained MCL is a relief because he's only going to be out a couple weeks. But this, to me, makes A.J. Dillon a must-start running back. If you have him on your team, you got to start him. He has the upside to where he could be running back one, both of these weeks. I don't think it'll happen, but I still think he'll be top 10 probably both weeks with how he plays. I mean, he got 2 touchdowns this past week whenever he came in for Aaron Jones. So with him being a full workhorse, I think it's just going to be even better. Andy Reid said there is a pretty good chance that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to play in week 11. This is pretty big because Daryl Williams has been playing really good. He's actually played, well, fantasy-wise, he's been better than what Clyde Edwards-Helaire ever has been. So I'd watch this. If he's playing, if you drafted him early, you almost have to start him unless you got some good waiver pickups. If you got good waiver pickups, I can understand you sitting him because I'm curious if they're going to do like a 50-50 split now because Daryl Williams was really good for them. But I could also see them just handing back the reins to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I would like to see what happens on Sunday. But I know a lot of situations you can't exactly do that. Cordarrelle Patterson, big waiver wire guy. He sprained his ankle, and he is likely out this Thursday, but it could potentially be longer. So this makes Wayne Gallman an interesting ad. Mike Davis, I don't know if Mike Davis will do it, will get a bump up with this or not, but definitely I would try to add Wayne Gallman if you could, because if Patterson's out an extended amount of time, I think Wayne Gallman's going to get a lot of his looks. So, yeah, I'd keep an eye on that situation. But if you can add Wayne Gallman, I would, just for the chance that he could be something. Saquon Barkley is trending towards playing in Week 11. This was always a timetable of him returning from that sprained ankle. if he's playing, you got to play him. Booker, he played really good in his absence, but if Barkley's playing, they're going to give him the workhorse role again. So I wouldn't be worried about anything with Saquon. If he's playing, you're playing him. And last thing is Elijah Mitchell fractured his finger. I know Shanahan already said that they're still hopeful that he can play this week, but they're unsure. They said he's going to have surgery, I believe, Wednesday. So we'll see how that goes. We won't get any real good information until after the surgery. So we'll see how that goes. But if he is to miss time, I think Jeff Wilson Jr. is probably the best running back to look at from that 49ers backfield. He had 10 carries this past game, which is his second game back from injury, which last week, his first game back from injury, he did not even get a single attempt. So I think they're just kind of been easing in Jeff Wilson, so that way he's kind of gearing back up. So I'd add Jeff Wilson because last year he was – I know I added him in a couple weeks last year, and he helped win me a couple playoff games. Unfortunately, didn't win any championships last year, but it is what it is, fantasy football. But Jeff Wilson was a huge playoff success last year for the fantasy football playoffs, and there's a chance that he could be again this year. So I would add him if you got a bench spot, especially with Elijah Mitchell potentially going to miss a game or two with this fractured finger. So, yeah. Now, moving on, I'm going to go to the waiver wire pickups, which first off, I'm going to say the teams on bye this week are the Broncos and the Rams. And we welcome back, see if I can find my list. We welcome back the Bears, Bengals, Giants, and Texans from the bye. So first waiver wire pickup, which is absolute max priority, A.J. Dillon. Like I said before, I think he's going to be a top 10 running back each week with him getting this workhorse role. He is owned in 67% of leagues, but to me, that's low even with Aaron Jones playing. This is the reason why you hold on to those backup running backs sometimes. Now, I'm not saying you need to. I can understand if you see a guy out there in the waiver wire like Cordero Patterson was, and you have no other bench spots. I could see you dropping A.J. Dillon for him if you had to. But this is the reason why these high backups are such a priority to hold on to, like Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, A.J. Dillon. Whenever their top guys go down, they instantly become top running backs in fantasy football. So if he's out there in your league by some miracle, go grab him as soon as possible. Make him your first waiver priority. Because even though it's going to be only for like a couple weeks, what happens if Aaron Jones goes down for the fantasy football playoffs? You're going to wish that you would have spent up on him. So if you're in a fab league, I would spend a lot of money on him. I don't know exactly how much I would spend on him. To me, if you still got enough fab, I would spend like 50% on him. So, yeah. Next up is Wayne Gallman. Like I said earlier, Cordero Patterson could be missing a couple weeks. So I grab Wayne Gallman because Mike Davis, he has about zero juice left. And Wayne Gallman looked actually pretty good last year whenever he was playing for the Giants. Saquon was injured, so he played in Saquon's absence, and he actually played pretty solid. So I'd pick him up because he probably has more juice than what Mike Davis does, and somebody's got to run the ball. So, I think it's a good ad for the time being, especially with the choices we have on the waiver wire this week. Next up is Donta Foreman. He plays for the Titans now. He's on in 5% of leagues, and it seems like he is definitely the best running back for the Titans right now. And he's the most explosive, so I'd pick him up just because he's most likely a starting running back. I wouldn't be playing him right now because they really seem to split it up between him, Adrian Peterson. Can't think of the third guy in the backfield right now, but yeah. or Jeremy McNichols. Jeremy McNichols is the third guy. But yeah, they're splitting it up a lot. So I wouldn't be wanting to really start anyone from back there right now. But with bye weeks going on, sometimes you have to do what you got to do. Next up is Ramon J Stevenson. He's only owned in 39% of leagues. I would definitely pick him up because these past 2 weeks he's shown that he can handle the workload. If Damian Harris were to miss again, he's definitely an easy start for me. I almost like him more than Damian Harris personally, but he obviously works pretty well even with Damian Harris in there. So he's been a healthy scratch a couple times this year, which is odd. But yeah, I definitely want to add Ramon J Stevenson if I can. Then we're throwing a quarterback in here with Cam Newton. Cam Newton's on 27% of leagues since he came back to the Panthers. And I would definitely add him because like he only played a few snaps this past Sunday and he scored a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. So he's got a great matchup this weekend against Washington, which is giving up the most points to quarterbacks. So he's got a great matchup to start. He's got good weapons there with Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall. So, yeah, I'd definitely – if you're in a pinch for a quarterback, he's definitely a guy you should look at. And then going next is a wide receiver, which is also his teammate, Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson was kind of falling out for most of the fantasy season, but now with Cam Newton back and he threw him that touchdown pass, he's definitely worth a speculative add. I wouldn't put it at top priority if you don't have to, because this is only one game and it's hard to really judge anything off of one game. But it seemed, he threw him the touchdown pass, so it's, to me, he's worth picking up because if he is that number one option in Carolina, they got a lot of weapons there. They got a pretty good offense. So if Cam is the key to unlocking it, then you're going to want that piece on your fantasy team. The final player who's owned in only 12% of leagues is Jamal Agnew. I know Jacksonville really isn't the greatest spot for receivers, but Jamal Agnew has, for some reason, been the most consistent of the group. Let me look up his numbers real quick. But yeah, he's over the past, since week 5, he's had 10 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, 15 fantasy points, 6 fantasy points, and 13 fantasy points. And all of his fantasy points this past week against the Colts was with 5 targets but 0 receptions. He got all that on rushing. So he's used both in the rushing game and the receiving game. He's been one of the more targeted receivers in that Jacksonville offense, which is crazy because I got Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault, which are, in my opinion, both more talented receivers. But it seems like Trevor Lawrence has been throwing to Agnew more, which I can understand because he is a good gadget guy receiver. Now, moving on to my next segment is going to be the trending or ending segment. So this is where there's been some trends in NFL because by this point in the season, we already know who the big guys are. Like Cooper Kupp is wide receiver 1, without a doubt. He's only had 2 games with less than 20 points, and he's had 0 games under 11 points. So he's definitely the clear-cut wide receiver 1 through this year. Jonathan Taylor is probably going to be the running back 1 the rest of the year. But some of these there's some trends going on that I want to discuss and whether I think they're going to keep on going on or if I think they're going to end. And starting off, we're going to start with Courtland Sutton. And it's going to be with Courtland Sutton. He hasn't been good whenever Jerry Judy plays. So I want to bring up the numbers here, which when Jerry Judy is out, Courtland Sutton gets 9.1 targets a game, so a little over 9 targets a game, and 87.5 receiving yards a game. That's with Jerry Judy out. Now with Judy in, he only gets 3 targets a game and 25.5 yards a game. That's a big difference. That's 6 less targets and over 60 less receiving yards a game. And whether that's trending or ending, I think that's going to keep on trending. Jerry Judy seems to be the number 1 receiver in this offense. Even though Courtland Sutton is an amazing talent, I just think that Jerry Judy is going to be the wide receiver 1 going forward. He's been getting a lot of targets, and whenever he's in, Courtland Sutton just seems to be pushed to the side. So in Dynasty, I would hold on to him because he's a free agent after this year. I would like to see where he signs before deciding to do anything with him. But in Redraft League, he's on the bye this week. I'd honestly be okay with cutting him. As much as it hurts to say that, if you can hold on to him, I'd hold on to him just in case something would change. But I think we saw enough. They've played 4 games together already, so I think we see enough that it's just Judy more than it is Sutton. So yeah, I definitely, if you can trade him, I'd trade him away for any sort of like name relevant person. Otherwise, I'd cut him. Next up, we got if Elijah Moore can keep going after this past month. Elijah Moore this past month has been averaging over 6 targets a game, and he's had over 10 fantasy points in all 4 of those games, including 13 points in 3 of the 4. So he's been playing really well. The only thing that makes me scared about this, I would love to say trending because he's a really good receiver. He was one of my favorite rookie wide receivers coming out of this draft class. But the thing that scares me is that the quarterback turnover. He's been doing a lot of this big, good production whenever Mike White has been there at quarterback. And Zach Wilson is probably going to be coming back. And we haven't really saw much with Elijah Moore and Zach Wilson yet because it seems like Zach Wilson has preferred Corey Davis and Jamison Crowder over him. So I would like to see how he plays more with Zach Wilson, but to me, I think this is probably going to end whenever Zach Wilson's back. Next up is, will Jonathan Taylor's dominance keep going over the rest of the season? And to me, this is going to be an easy trend. Like I said, he's been the running back. I believe he is already the running back 1 over Henry now. Yeah, he is a number 1 overall running back now. But since week 4, he's had 1,000 rushing yards. And he has, over the past 4 weeks, he has over 15 fantasy points more than the next running back in that span, which is James Conner. And James Conner had a 3-touchdown performance in those 4 weeks. So it's pretty crazy. Jonathan Taylor has basically a full game more fantasy points than the next over the past month. He's behind only Cooper Kupp for fantasy points in that whole 4-week span. So he's been absolutely dominant lately. He's had a touchdown in the past 7 games, I believe. Yeah, since week 4, he's had a touchdown in every single game. And he has one of the best remaining schedules for running back. So I think he's going to be the clear-cut running back 1 on this season. Next up is if Hunter Henry is going to keep scoring touchdowns like he is. Hunter Henry has 7 touchdowns in the past 7 games. Now, normally I would say, yeah, usually people that get this kind of work, it usually keeps going for them. It'll be inconsistent, but usually they'll still end up with a good amount of touchdowns throughout the season. But the thing that worries me the most with Hunter Henry is that the lack of targets that he gets. So, for instance, in this run, He started out getting 5 targets, which is pretty good for a tight end, and then 8 targets, which is really good for a tight end. But then it goes 2, 4, 3, 3, 4 targets over the past few weeks, which I know he's been a red zone threat, which is his main thing. But I'm just afraid that Henry is going to be a touchdown or bust tight end, because if you look at his numbers over the past few weeks, it's been 2 for 25, 2 for 23, 1 for 33, 2 for 19, and 4 for 37. Now, all those except for one had touchdowns included with them, but that's not something you can rely on. You can rely on targets, you can rely on yardage, especially air yards, but you cannot rely on touchdowns. That is such a volatile figure to go off of. I know a lot of people like to use touchdowns on bases whenever they trade players around the league. Oh, this guy has so many touchdowns. Like if you're trying to trade away James Conner, you can't. Well, yes, he's had a lot of touchdowns. It doesn't mean he's going to get a lot of touchdowns at end of the season. Because if it's the same way for Hunter Henry, same way with like how Devonte Adams was last year. You saw Devonte Adams, he got a ridiculous amount of touchdowns. I believe it was like 18. And now this year I think he has like 5. I don't even know. He hasn't had really too much. I want to check that actually. But either way, the main thing that I want to say is that you can't trust touchdowns. I do think that he could keep this going, because every year there's always those players that just they score touchdowns, and you don't really understand why. And to me, that's Hunter Henry this year. But yeah, okay, Devonte Adams, he had 18 touchdowns last year, and he only has 3 so far this year. So it's a bit crazy. But yeah, touchdowns are just so volatile. You can't trust them, especially whenever you're getting around 3 to 4 targets a game. To me, he's a touchdown or bust tight end, which he's been getting really lucky getting touchdowns these past few weeks. So to me, I would say end, because he's got a kind of a rough schedule next few weeks. He has Atlanta this week, so I think he could keep going this week. But then after that, you got Tennessee and then Buffalo after that. Next up is Mike Williams. And over the past few weeks, Mike Williams has greatly struggled after starting as like the wide receiver 1 the first few weeks. So pulling up the stats, weeks 1 through 5, Mike Williams had 10.2 targets per game and 94.2 yards per game. Since then, weeks 6 through 10, he's had 5.2 targets per game, so 5 targets less, and 34.2 yards per game, so 60 yards less. He's had knee swelling for the past few weeks, but Staley has said that it's been a non-factor, but obviously looking at his numbers, I think it has been a factor. But also it's been partly thanks to Keenan Allen now coming back out and being a dominant receiver again. So it kind of goes hand in hand. It's been tight ends have been getting more involved. Keenan Allen's been the alpha receiver again since week 6. And it's been, I think, partly because of this injury that Mike Williams has been nursing. I don't think he's fully 100% healthy. And now it seems like that breakout season that we thought that he was having is not a thing anymore. It seems like he's back to what Mike Williams always has been, and it's just average. Next up is I guess I should say, with the trending or ending for Mike Williams, I think this is going to keep on trending, unfortunately, because I really wanted Mike Williams to break out. But yeah, I just think that we saw the flash, and that flash is now gone, taken away. So yeah, if you can trade him away because of what he did earlier in the season, that's probably your best bet. if you want to hold on for the hope that he can get it back for the fantasy playoffs, I'm totally fine with that too. I don't foresee it happening. I would much rather have Keenan Allen over Mike Williams, but to each their own. Next up is trending our ending. Will Jacoby Myers keep trending with the touchdown scoring? Jacoby Myers is one of the weirdest stories in the NFL. So Jacoby Myers, he scored his first career touchdown this past week, and Myers has had 134 career receptions so far, over 1,500 receiving yards, and he had no touchdowns. That was both the receptions and both the yards were the most by a player without a receiving touchdown. But the weirdest thing is that he's thrown for 2 touchdowns before he caught his first one. So while that was one of the craziest stats, yes, I think that he will trend towards getting more touchdowns. Touchdown regression goes both ways. You get positive touchdown regression, you get negative touchdown regression. We see the negative touchdown regression with Devonte Adams, and I think Jacoby Myers is due to get more touchdowns. While you can't really predict him, that's the only bad thing. I still think that he's got a chance to score more touchdowns for the end of the season. Now, the last one that I want to bring up is Daryl Henderson's slump. Daryl Henderson started off the season really good. He was almost a steal for where he was being drafted in fantasy drafts. But now these past few weeks, it's been kind of rough on him. Pulling up his numbers. These past 4 weeks, it's been rough on him. He's only scored over 10 fantasy points once, which was against Houston, where he got 20. And we all know how Houston is. They're not good. So it seems like Henderson's been pretty well tied to where the Rams are doing good, because I wouldn't associate Henderson's slump being compared, or I wouldn't tie Henderson's slump being with Henderson. I would tie it with the Rams' success, because starting off the season, the Rams were playing very well and Henderson was doing very well. And over the past few weeks, the Rams have been kind of slipping up, which you can see by Henderson's numbers that they have been. Over the past 4 weeks, his carries have been going down. He had 15 back in week 7 against Detroit, and then 14 against Houston, 11 against Tennessee, and five rushing attempts against San Francisco, which thankfully his target numbers have been helping him out. He had 6 targets against San Francisco. So if he didn't have that, his fantasy outing would have been not good. But yeah, I don't think this is going to keep trending, because if you look at his schedule, yeah, I think it'll be pretty tough after the bye week with Green Bay. But then they got Jacksonville. Arizona will be tough, but then they got Seattle. Seattle hasn't been looking too great. Maybe by then Russell Wilson will be healthy enough that it will be more of a game, which might hurt Henderson. But, well, then they got Minnesota, Baltimore, and San Francisco. So they do have a pretty tough schedule to end out the season, outside the one game with Jacksonville. I would be a little worried with Henderson, but for where you got him in fantasy drafts, I'm not too worried. He's still a very good starting running back on a good offense. It's just, I think the Rams will take this bye week to kind of get Odell more involved, to kind of adjust for life after Robert Woods. And I think they'll still be able to figure out. I mean, Sean McVay is a good coach. It's just that they have had a couple rough weeks with injuries and everything going on with the trades and with free agent with Odell. So I'd give it after the bye week. If after the bye week he still doesn't look good, that's whenever it's time to panic. Now, finally, the last segment is going to be our starts of the week. Now, I have my starts of the week and my reasonings why. I also have Austin's starts of the week, but I do not have his reasonings why. So if you would like to know his reasonings why, go ahead and follow him on Twitter at the Austin Isaac and message him or at him like, hey, why do you think I should start this guy? Or, which actually, let's just go ahead and get into his starts of the week right off the bat. Go ahead and get through them. His start of the week at quarterback is Cam Newton. I actually thought about putting him in myself because he has a really good matchup. And if you're Washington, you're not preparing for Cam Newton. You're preparing for Sam Darnold or PJ Walker. Obviously, Cam's been in Carolina before, so you could kind of look back at the tape, but I don't believe he's played under Matt Rule before. If he has, I'm sorry that I'm incorrect, but I really don't think he has played with Matt Rule. So it's going to be a different kind of offense. And at this point, I think Cam Newton's probably better than what Darnold has been over the past few months, or that's a few months. It's only been about a month that he hasn't been great. So, yeah, I definitely want to start Cam Newton if I could. Which, speaking of Cam Newton being back and everything, this reminds me, if you have Christian McCaffrey, I'd almost want to sell high just because Cam Newton's going to steal a lot of those rushing touchdowns that otherwise Christian McCaffrey would have got. I know it'd be tough to do. You could still hold on to him because he was both a leading rusher and leading receiver this past week for Carolina. So he's still going to get the touches. He's still going to be a good running back. It's just I don't think he's going to be that number one running back that you drafted him to be. At running back, Austin says that you should start Damian Harris if he plays. And Austin doesn't have this, but I'd also be comfortable with starting Ramon J Stevenson if Damian Harris is out. So you can ask him his thoughts on it, but I would be good with starting Ramon J Stevenson if Harris would be out. But otherwise, yeah, you could probably start Damian Harris. And then at wide receiver, he's got Jacoby Myers. I guess he's a believer that Jacoby Myers' touchdown trend is going to keep on going. I believe they play Atlanta this week. So, yeah, pretty good matchup for them all around. And then at tight end, he's got Dalton Schultz. Now, the only concern I have with Dalton Schultz is that this past week is the first week of Michael Gallup back. And Dalton Schultz got 2 targets and 1 reception. And I'm almost kind of afraid that with Gallup being back, that's going to hurt Dalton Schultz a lot. I mean, this past week they scored 45 points or something, and Dalton Schultz only got 1 reception. I don't like that very much at all. I think that could be something that keeps on trending. Talking about our trends or ends. So I would be on the lookout to see how that goes. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about that one. As for me, my quarterback start of the week is Mac Jones, which I guess goes pretty well with Austin's start of the weeks because he had both Damian Harris and Jacoby Myers as starts of the week. We saw what I forget who it was playing the Falcons, but whoever was playing the Falcons last week, we saw the Falcons are not very good. So yeah, I feel like you can start almost any New England Patriots player at this point because they've been playing really well and Atlanta has not been playing very well. Or I almost forgot some of my best things about Mac Jones. Mac Jones is the 20th overall quarterback so far this year on the season, and he's been the best rookie quarterback, which is kind of crazy because you got Trevor Lawrence as well playing pretty good. Well, not pretty good. He hasn't been playing very good at all. But with Mac Jones, how he dropped so far, it's kind of crazy to think that with him dropping all the way to the Patriots, that he would end up being the best fantasy quarterback, especially since he's not a running style quarterback like Trey Lance was, which, I mean, Trey Lance hasn't gotten any starting time, so it's understandable. But the fact that he's not really like crazy athletic, he just does what Tom Brady used to do, and he's really good at it. I know Tyrann Mathieu put on Twitter, he said just because he doesn't throw the sidearm pass and stuff like that doesn't mean that he's not a good quarterback. He's still a good quarterback. My running back star of the week is A.J. Dillon. When A.J. Dillon is out, when A.J. Dillon's out, when Aaron Jones is out, you got to start A.J. Dillon. As we saw this past week, A.J. Dillon can be a top 10 running back whenever he gets a workload. His actual, measurables, like height, weight, 40 time, all this stuff, was actually very comparable to Derrick Henry, which he's not Derrick Henry, at all. Derrick Henry's in his own league by himself, but he's very comparable to Derrick Henry, size-wise, and I think that he could have a similar type impact to where he can just take over games. So even though he has not the greatest matchup against Minnesota's gave up the 11th most points to running backs, I still think Dillon should be an easy top 10 running back this next week. Then for wide receivers, my wide receiver start of the week is Devonta Smith. And Devonta Smith's finally finding a really good groove with Jalen Hurts. These past 2 weeks, he was a top 5 receiver in both weeks. I'm not saying he's going to do that again, but he should be at least a wide receiver 2, which is what you probably drafted him as, or maybe even your 3rd or 4th wide receiver. I think he's gotten to the point to where, yes, you should start him week in, week out. Yes, he might not give you good outings, but no wide receiver is consistent throughout the years. So I would start him. They got a good matchup against New Orleans. New Orleans gives up the 4th most points to wide receivers. So especially with Jameis Winston being hurt and they're starting Trevor Siemian, I think this will be a pretty good battle between the two NFC teams. So both fighting for their season, with Philadelphia more fighting for the season than New Orleans at this time, but definitely Philadelphia is fighting for this season. And tight end star of the week is going to be Dawson Knox. Same as Austin talked about Dan Arnold last week, the Colts are a great matchup to go against for tight ends. Colts give up 6 most points to tight ends, and the Colts defense made Dan Arnold look pretty good whenever Trevor Lawrence was not looking good. I know at one point Trevor Lawrence was it was in the 3rd quarter and Trevor Lawrence had 6 completions, and Dan Arnold still ended up with over 10 fantasy points. So I think you can start Dawson Knox. He'll probably end up getting his touchdown streak back. But yeah, I think Dan Arnold's a good play this week. Now that's going to be all for us today. Unfortunately, Isaac couldn't make it, or not Isaac, Austin could not make it. But yeah, hopefully we'll be back together again next week. I will finally have good internet by this time next week. So prayers that everything works out on both of our ends, because it's been back and forth, not good service between us two. But yeah, if you have any questions or want to talk to us more about fantasy football, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at the Fantasy Table, at the Austin Isaac, at Big Verkamp. Message me, at me on Twitter. I will try to answer as many questions as I can. But yeah, I think that is going to be all for us today. Hope you guys had a good time listening. I'm sorry it's kind of frantic trying to get through all this stuff whenever things just don't work out how I was hoping so. But hopefully guys got to learn some stuff for this week, and hopefully I'll help you guys win some more games. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and goodbye.